Thank you so much for having me here. You know, conferences is pretty much a really nice experience, especially now that after COVID, we're actually getting to see each other. So, you know, while I'm setting up, just say hi to your colleagues and tell them that they should have a nice day. Can I just start? Yeah. All right. All right. Yeah, so I'm really excited about this conference, and I'm so happy that the previous talks were actually about component-driven development and visuals. So thank you so much for all the speakers that helped my talk make much more sense. My name is Yann Braga, and I'm a Storybook maintainer where I work mostly on the testing tools. And I work full-time on Storybook as an open source engineer at Chromatic, which is a cloud-based service that provides you an even better experience if you're using Storybook by publishing that to the cloud and providing you like visual regression testing and UI review processes. So in this talk, I'm going to be talking about incredible features that we just built in Storybook and we think are going to revolutionize the front-end testing. First of all of you are, or most of you are, developing in components, right? Apart from that one PHP developer, I guess. So the thing is, developing components nowadays is so hard. You have to account for so many things like accessibility or responsiveness or behavior, and all of these things, you really have to test them in order to get really confident when you're building UIs. So hands up if you're testing your components. Well, that's pretty good. That's great to know at least half of us are testing. That should be better, though. So I bet you didn't know that you can test your components in so many different ways. You've got visual tests, you got interaction tests, accessibility tests, you can test the composition of your components, and you can even test your user flows directly in the browser, right? So in this talk, I'm going to be basically focusing on interaction testing. So just taking a step back and looking at the anatomy of a test, who here knows about the AAA pattern? That's a pretty well-known pattern in testing, which essentially consists of arrange, act, and assert. So when you arrange your stuff, you're basically preparing the test case for your component, where you can provide some mock props and some data necessary for it to render. Then you act, where you render that component, and then you do some interactions on top of it. And then you finally assert, where you verify your outcome. If there are failures, then you're going to fix them, I hope. So who here actually uses testing library to test their components? Well, that's a lot. That's really great. So the anatomy of an interaction test, and it's great that you all use testing libraries, so I don't need to explain that much. So you essentially isolate your component, and you set up that test case, right? You always need to isolate the entire component, so you're making sure that it works on its own, and you're pretty confident about it. And then you use testing library to simulate some interactions. So you might be clicking on a button and expecting some modal to happen, or some elements to be removed, and stuff like that. And finally, you have to run assertions by some test runner, just like Jest. But you know, it takes a lot of work to set up isolated test cases. So I'm pretty sure that you've gone through some experiences where it's like you're setting up this test case, but then you're like just copy-pasting code, and it like might be looking so complex like this. Like in order to render my page, I actually have to mock the router, I have to mock the Redux store, I have to provide some theming because I'm using styled components, otherwise the components don't render, and all of that trouble while I'm doing that. And thank you so much, Maggie, for basically showing how visual things are important, because you don't get a visual feedback when setting these things up. So it's sometimes really complicated to actually go around it and understand what's going on. So I wonder if there's a tool that helps you isolate test cases with great visual feedback. Well, for the ones who don't know, this is called Storybook. So Storybook is built for isolating isolating components as test cases. It allows you to visualize every variant of your components, as well as interact with them, change some props at runtime, see how your component behaves. You can also supercharge it with add-ons, which will allow you to change the theming or assert events which are being sent from your components. And you even get really nice documentation automatically from your code. And I know that a lot of people don't really like writing documentation, so this is a godsend. So who here uses Storybook? Oh, wow. If you don't mind, I really want to take a picture because I'm really amazed by that. So who uses Storybook here? Nice. Thank you so much. That's great. Well, Storybook is maintained by a lot of open source people, a lot of people in the open source community. It's built by over 1,400 active members in the community. And it's also a tool used by thousands of companies and projects. In fact, it's pretty funny. Like, we've got Code Sandbox, we've got GitHub, we've got Storybook, Postman, and all of these, the companies, they're actually using Storybook. So a lot of the speakers here actually use Storybook on a daily basis. So, and also some of them actually use Chromatic as well to even enhance the experience. So Storybook works basically by, well, I don't need to explain, right? But basically you have a file of which you define what's the component you want to render. And also you have the concept of stories, which are essentially a combination of that component and some annotations where you set the necessary props and mocks that you need for that component to render in that scenario. And once you're done, you get this really nice visual overview of the component and right in the browser. And also, you know, you get some extra stuff like connecting design tools or getting automatic documentation and a bunch of more. So coming back to the anatomy of a test using the AAA pattern, we pretty much see that the story is the arrange step of it. And if you're writing your components in Storybook, you're kind of going through the setup. Now you've got your test case. So why do you need to do the same thing in testing library, for instance? Well, now you don't. Actually, you can just reuse that story into your tests. So how does that work? You essentially use some helper libraries that we released where you can write your, you can bring your stories as a test scenario, and then you're going to just pair it with testing library or Axe for accessibility, let's say, and then you run your assertions. So it goes as follows. You import your story file, which will contain every single story from your component, and then you use compose stories from Storybook Testing React, a tool that we released last year that allows you to reuse your stories into your tests. And by calling compose stories from your story file, what you actually get is an entire overview of every single story that you have, but now turned into a reusable React component that packages up all of the providers, decorators, and the props necessary for that to render. And I don't know about you, but I think this is so beautiful because it feels like I'm writing a poem in this test. I don't care about the setup anymore. I just get this menu of options like, oh, that's the scenario I want to test, and now I'm going to write my assertions. So that my test is so much more readable, where I just know that I'm rendering the default scenario of my component, and I'm making some assertions and testing them. But you know, we all understand now that using text to visualize is not a great experience. So we're still running things in Node with JSDOM, and we get the output from the CLI. So even though JSDOM is great and fast, it's not an actual browser, so we miss a few things over there. And if there's a failure in your test, well, can you visualize that? I don't have brain power to parse HTML into something in my mind. I'm sorry about that. And God help me if that contains SVG. So given that experience, we know that debugging UIs in CLI is kind of clunky. I mean, writing tests with testing library in Jest is amazing. Don't tell me, don't get me that. But basically, the experience of debugging later on is pretty bad. So it feels like you're playing a text adventure game, but in your PS5. So I'm pretty sure there's a better way to do that. So I'm wondering what if you could run the same tests, but in the browser instead? So at Storybook, we were intrigued by that very question. And we used the learnings from the last year to build what we call Storybook testing. So Storybook testing now brings you the experience which you had before of moving your stories into your tests, but now you move your tests into your stories. So instead of doing all of that in Jest now, you're going to use the interactions in Storybook. So in Storybook 6.4, which you can actually use right now, we introduced the construct of a play function that executes the interaction right in the browser and after the component renders. And then you can assert things like, let's say, open a model. And then you can also use Jest to assert whether the model has been opened correctly. And it goes as follows. We have the new construct called the play function, which, plays after the component renders. And then you've got pretty much the same code that you had in your test before. And in order to use those in the browser, we provide you browser-friendly or browser-compatible wrappers for testing library in Jest. And that means that you can essentially just move the things that you know and love, and you get both the really nice DX experience of using them, but with a visual overview instead. And to make it even better, we actually released add-on interactions, which, by the way, Gert worked a lot on that. And add-on interactions essentially visualizes, oh wow, mic drop. So the add-on interactions essentially visualizes those interactions in the browser as they happen. And once they're running, you see what's going on. And after they're done, you will see either if there's a failure or if they succeeded. So in order to make things even better, the add-on interactions allow you to play back using controls so that you can actually switch, like you can go through these steps and visualize the interactions as they happen. So not only you can see the test code in your browser, but as steps go by, you will see how your component behaves. And this is like exactly what we're looking for, right? We want to write tests because it's pretty important, but we also want to get a visual feedback of what they actually are doing. So, like how incredible this thing is. It's, I don't know, I just really love it. So, at the same time, even though this is a great experience, it's still a kind of a manual process because in order to know whether there's a failure on your tests, you actually need to run Storybook. You have to open Storybook, and you have to select that very story so that you can see whether it failed or passed. But you know, people don't want that. They want to automate tests. They don't want to care about these things. They want to actually, you know, just throw that in CI and see things working or not. So we went ahead and released a Storybook test runner. So the test runner essentially is a tool powered by Jest and Playwright, which gives you both the superpowers of these tools. So essentially, it will turn every single one of your stories into tests. And because you're using Jest and Playwright, you get really nice parallelization. You get watch mode and many more features. So it works the following way. Every single story is converted into a test. If you have simple stories, let's say just a button or a card, it will check for rendering errors. And that basically means that if your component doesn't fail to render, then you're good. And you might be asking like, oh, I don't see a lot of value in this thing, but actually there is. Let's say you're updating a Material UI library or something. How do you know whether every single one of your components are working or not? Well, this gives you a really nice overview for that. And if you're using the play function and interactions in Storybook, it will play those interactions. It will wait for the report of them. And whether there's a failure or a success, it will give you this overview in the CLI. And because we're using Playwright, that actually means that you can get cross-browser testing and all of those things running parallel really fast. And yes, you can actually test Safari. Look at that. So that's really nice, Yann. You're like providing me this really great DX experience and such, but aren't we back to the CLI? Like, if there's a failure in CI, will I just need to parse HTML again? That makes no sense, right? Yeah, it doesn't make sense. So we went ahead and we released the click to debug feature. So basically, once you get a report from the CLI, it will not only tell you the output for the error, but it will also provide you a reproducible URL, of which when you click, it will go right into Storybook, opening the interactions panel and show you exactly what is failing. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm really excited about this. So this way, you're actually getting a pretty interesting experience where you don't rely on artifacts anymore, like, let's say, a video or screenshots in your CI, because you still have to figure out how to run those things locally. So you can actually deploy your Storybook, let's say, using Chromatic, and then you get an overview that you can actually click on that link, and you will see the failure right in the browser. You can step through the interactions and see up to which point your interactions were happening correctly, and then why there's a failure over there. And you know, you can use your favorite developer tools to debug them. So the test runner is incredible in that sense, but it also provides you even extra features. We have an experimental testing hook functionality, of which essentially provides you a way to set up some stuff before even running Storybook, and then executing stuff as the component pre-renders, and then after component renders, you can also execute some other stuff. And that essentially means that you can execute, let's say, snapshot testing, or maybe you can run some accessibility checks. So that basically means that if you have a Storybook right now, if you install the test runner and you run it, you get really nice checks for your components, but you can also get 100% of accessibility coverage. And this is just an example of how you can approach that using Axe Playwright. And by the way, if you want to know more about Playwright, we've got a speaker here that has a lot of blog posts, so just reach out to Debbie later on. But anyways, so When we're back to the anatomy of a test, previously where a story only provided you the arrange step, now it actually provides you the whole thing. So essentially, Storybook is now providing you a AAA experience that is going to help you and automatically get executed in the browser at your leisure. So now we can definitely say that like Storybook is bringing you this AAA experience, which we believe is going to revolutionize the testing in front end. And to make things even better, if you are interested in like, oh, but my designers, they want to be part of our workflow, you can actually use Chromatic on top of it so that you get all your Storybook in the cloud, and then the designers have access to your changes, they can visualize what's going on, and they can actually get to approve or deny your stuff. And you know, there's so many very interesting things happening around the Storybook and component era. And in this talk, I only really focused on interaction testing, but we've got so much stuff being cooked up, and I'm pretty sure you're going to love all of that. And just keep an eye out in the community. By the way, who's here in the Discord community of Storybook? Well, we should totally fix that. So I'm going to invite each one of you if I get the opportunity, but yes. So check out our blog posts, you know, see updates for more. And in fact, we do have a website. So in storybook.js/tutorials, we do, oh, thank you for that. So in Storybook, oh, am I? Hello, yes. In Storybook/tutorials, you're going to have access to a bunch of incredible material built by our own maintainers and the community. So that, thank you. And there's actually one handbook for UI testing. There's, I believe, 9 different chapters with a lot of interesting detail for everything I've been talking to and more. So just, you know, check it out. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me on Twitter. And by the way, I'm actually releasing a course next month about Storybook and React, so, you know, keep an eye for that. And on the left side, is it the left side? Yes. On the left side, you're going to get the QR code for the testing announcement blog post. And on the right side, you can see, well, at Chromatic, we're hiring. So if you're interested in that, just give it a check. If you like the challenges that we're facing, it's pretty much what we work on every day. And I don't know, I get to work on open source all day. Like, how crazy is that? So thank you so much for today. And yeah, let's keep going.
Thank you, Yann.